Before I begin, I do want to give a shout out to all of my patrons. Without you, this content wouldn't be possible. Like many of you, I've been spending my quarantine trying not to sink into a deep hole of depression while also trying to get some work done and also trying to not over worry about the state of the world, even though every major government is seemingly flopping this whole pandemic thing. But I'm also playing a lot of Animal Crossing, like a lot of gays out there. And I'm not the best player. Like, I didn't grow up playing Animal Crossing. I was not like a gentle Animal Crossing queer growing up. I was more of a competitive Pokemon gay. So this world was like very new to me. So it came to me as a surprise that a lot of folks didn't like Tom Nook, because he seemed like a very nice bear panda, but it seems that a lot of folks think he's like a landlord and thus inherently evil. So today we're going to talk about evil landlords, rent, and Tom Nook. Hi, my name is Ruben, and yeah, let's talk about landlords. So before we get to decide whether or not Tom Nook is a landlord, we need to define what a landlord is, right? Or what they do, if they do anything at all. Because I don't think that like collecting money once a month is like doing anything per se. But let me not get ahead of myself. One of the things that landlords are supposed to do is to provide housing, or at least that's what they say they do. See, when you really think about it, landlords don't necessarily provide housing. Often landlords buy more houses than they need, right? We all just need the one house for ourselves, right? But what landlords do is that they buy up other properties, right? And that makes it impossible for certain individuals to afford those properties, not only because that property is no longer available, but also because they're driving up, the property taxes of all the nearby houses, right? It makes it so that the demand for houses exceeds the supply of houses, right? Thus driving up prices. So does Tom Nook do that? And the answer is no. He doesn't buy up properties and drive up property taxes and make housing unavailable for folks. He actually makes housing really equitable, so much so that any ugly ass animal can join your island. Yes, I'm trying to get rid of Mott because he's ugly as fuck and he's annoying and I don't want him in my island. But because Tom Nook is such a equitable land provider or whatever, he gets to live in my island with me. Another thing that landlords do is that they essentially make you pay their mortgage, right? Oftentimes a house isn't paid off when renters come into the picture, and landlords often just use the rent money to pay their own mortgages, right? So it's wild because that means that as renters, we pay into the loan for the home, right? But at the end of the day, even though most of our money was used to pay off that home, we don't own any of that, right? And there's of course like rent to own situations sometimes, but those are like not as common as we'd like them to be, and they often come with a lot of stipulations that ultimately like you have to like weigh whether or not that actually benefits you. Does Tom Nook do that? Does he make you pay his mortgage? No, that motherfucker doesn't even have a home. He lives in the residential services offices, right? Which also starts off as a tent, right? If anything, the rent that you pay is actually like you paying off your home loan. So where landowners don't build the home that you live on usually, Tom Nook does build the home that you live on, or he has those little nephews or those other little panda bears build it for you, right? And build all the upgrades that you need. And at the end of the day, after you're done paying off all the loan to Tom Nook, you end up owning your house and you don't have to pay anything ever again, right? And how much you actually end up paying is all up to you actually, and how many rooms your greedy ass needs. And by your greedy ass, I mean my greedy ass. I have the whole shebang so far because I need a lot of storage space, because my little Animal Crossing monito figurine character, he has a lot of clothes that he wants to put a lot of stuff in it. So, but at the end of the day, like, Tom Nook is not forcing you to add like more rooms, right? And even then, even if you had to pay the loan that he gives you, right, that he, in some would argue, forces on you, but even then, like, I'm not sure about like the semantics of that, because he doesn't force you to take out that loan, because nobody forced you to buy the game. Like, if you never bought the Animal Crossing game and like flew to that island, you never had to take a loan from him, right? So we make the active choice of that, of taking out that loan from Tom Nook. And actually, Tom Nook functions more like as a contractor and like local bank branch that gives out like loans to local communities, right? Because he builds your home, he lends you that money, and then he gives you as much time as you need to pay it back, right? And even that loan in and of itself, if you were to build your whole entire like, you know, Little Mac mansion in Animal Crossing, it would only come out to 5,600,096 bells, right? For every upgrade. That's for every room, for a basement, for an attic, right? And that doesn't include furniture, but that's on you. But for the home itself, it's 5,696,000 bells, right? And that might seem like a lot, right? Like if we translate bells to dollars, like literally like bell for dollar, like that seems like a lot. But we have to remember that Animal Crossing has its own currency, right? So that like Tom Nook made up, and it feels kind of like he just made that currency up to like make us not feel like charity cases in some ways, because it's so arbitrary, right? Like you get bells from picking up weeds, right? From cleaning up your own neighborhood, and from picking up local fruit, and from selling like your fish and seashells. Like, please, like that is not like, that's more like of a bargaining system more than like a simple monetary system that we're used to, right? But anyways, but if we wanted to put a number on like how much your 4-bedroom house in Animal Crossing would be, we can translate the bells into dollars, right? And one way to do that is to find like what is like an item that we can compare to real life. And one of the items I found that was the most useful to measure as far as the currency goes was the coconut. And that's because every other fruit in the Animal Crossing islands varies by, you know, whether it's like your native fruit or not. So that's not a reliable thing to measure the currency with. And then all the other items like clothes and like, you know, furniture and so on, like that's subjective, because in real world, like all those things cost different prices, right? That don't necessarily like go one-to-one with the Animal Crossing world. But the coconut, consider it. If we look at what a coconut is worth in the Animal Crossing world, that's 250 bells. And what it is in real life, right? Right now, the general price for it is like a dollar, right? And that's not necessarily what your grocery store is selling it for, but it's what they bought it for, right? So it's a dollar. So let's say 250 bells equal one real world dollar. That means that if we do our math, your house, which is priced at 5,696,000 bells, actually only comes out to $22,784 in US currency. And that is not that bad for a 4-bedroom home that can have an attic and a basement and can be like hillside or beachfront or like in a forest, and like you can put it anywhere. Like that's actually super cheap. All that is to say that no, like Tom Nook does not make you pay his mortgage off. And actually, the loan that he gives you is so cheap that it's like ridiculous to kind of hold it against him, right? So in the real world, like you would be able to pay off this home off a minimum wage, right? In California at least. Something else that landlords should be doing but often don't is to prioritize like fixing their damn house whenever there's a problem with it, right? Such as faucets and toilets and insulation and heating and so on, right? But very often they don't actually look over that because it messes with their bottom line, right? The more they have to invest, the less they make out of your rent money, right? And Tom Nook doesn't really work like that, right? If you need something done, he does it for you. If you need your house like moved, if you need your door changed, your roof changed, your mailbox changed, he does it for you. There's a small price, but you know, at the end of the day, you don't pay rent after your mortgage is paid. So another thing landlords do is that they demand rent at the beginning of every month, right? Doesn't matter if you have it or not, you either pay your rent or you get evicted. Tom Nook doesn't do that though. He gives you a loan and then you pay it off at your leisure. You can take as long as you want to pay back that loan, which again comes out to about $20,000 in US currency, US dollars. And you don't really run the risk of getting kicked out of your home, right? That's yours for life. Doesn't matter how long you take to pay back that loan. So all in all, Tom Nook and landlords actually don't have very much in common, right? Again, Tom Nook functions more as like a contractor and a local bank, whereas landlords are just greedy motherfuckers that want your money. And even the name landlord is really ugly, as one of my friends, Cassandra, also known as Chicanisma or Gringa Tears, once mentioned. The name is really ugly. Like, how are you a lord of land on like stolen native land? Which I guess the world of Animal Crossing does a good job of like not making you a settler, because like nobody lives on the island. So I guess you're not participating in something like settler colonialism, but like you're still like taking all the resources from a place in order to build a town. So I guess it probably is settler colonialism, but like without all the nasty bits. And at the end of the day, there's like no landlords in Animal Crossing, only land friends. Except for Mott, who can get the fuck out of my island. Some of you might have like watched this and been like, well, what about mom and pop landowners? And this is where I dispel something for you. Most landowners, most renters are not mom and pop, right? Most of them are corporations. Ever since the recession of the late aughts, right? So 2007, 2008, the number of mom and pop landowners and renters has actually gone down to about less than half. Most of the landowners and renters are corporations that buy up a lot of housing units in order to turn a profit, right? And that has a lot to do with like gentrification as well, right? Because when corporations buy up housing units, they set like what kind of person and what kind of income, like what individuals like fit that image, right? So like remember that, like most landowners, when we're talking about landowners, they're not like mom and pop. A lot of the times it's corporations, right? And if you somehow feel attacked by it because you want to be a landowner someday, like remember that you have more in common with somebody that's about to be homeless or somebody that is homeless than you do with landowners or millionaires, right? Like you're not about to be America's like next top landowner. Like that is not, it's most likely not going to be the thing. So like before you like defend landowners in my comment section, like reconsider because that's not going to be you, girl. And if you're a landowner and you're watching this video and you're like, oh shit, that ain't me, well then congrats, girl, and like hook it up with some money. But also like right now is the time to have some class solidarity, right? Because again, you have more in common with the renters than you do banks, right? So something to remember if you're a landowner and you're like wanna be like, you know, kind to your tenants or humane or decent to your tenants and like, you know, waive their rent for the next few months until this crisis is over, right? And you give people time to recover. Like, so if you want to be a decent human being, these are the steps that you can take, right? You first of all, you can check if your home loan is with Fannie Mae or Freddie Mac, because those or any other federal lender, right? Because anything that goes under like a federal loan, right, that you got for your home, that's all you're protected, right? So the banks can't repossess your home and evict you or whatever, right? Because in the the legislation that the government passed, right, that you're protected, so they can't take that from you. And so another thing, you have to speak to your lender to see what steps you need to take in order to protect yourself, right? So a lot of the times they're offering to put put the few months that you're forgiving your renters rent, right? Like at the back end of, essentially add more time to your loan. Other banks are doing a forbearance where they might, allow you to have 3 months worth of like non-payments, and then eventually you get like a year to pay off those 3 months. So you have to talk to your lender and together you can figure out a plan, right? Because right now it'll cost more for like the banks to like drag you out of your home and like repossess it than it will for them to like cut a deal with you, right? Another thing, like if for some reason the only way you're making money is by like charging people to live in a home that you bought, right? Then and you don't have any other source of income, then one thing that you need to do is probably file for unemployment, homie. So you can ask for unemployment or any type of other financial assistance, right? And at the end of the day, like you cannot remember to like not blame your tenants for this, because like first of all, like the government told them to not go to work, right? And it made it impossible for them to do so. So it's not their fault. And second of all, like that's a risk you take in like, making that type of investment in a home that you don't live in. When you make an investment, in this case, investing in property, right? Returns aren't always promised. And right now is not a time where you're making returns, right? Right now you're making a temporary loss in your investment, right? So it's important for you to contextualize like your financial decision in like the greater scheme of things, right? Like again, don't blame your tenants for something that's out of their control, right? There's tools that you can use to get yourself out of this situation. If you're a renter right now, one of the most important things to know is that if your landowners, if their home is under a federal loan, that then they cannot evict you, right? So you have at least 120 days after not paying rent for them that they cannot evict you, right? So try not to worry. And you'll be surprised that at least half of all rentals are covered under the federal loans, right? Which include lenders like Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac, right? So I'll put a link in the description that you can use to see if your home is covered under that. The next steps you can take regardless is to speak to your local tenants union. They can not only provide you with legal advice and actually legal representation a lot of the times, but they might have a better understanding of your local laws and protections. Another thing they can provide is that they can connect you with different organizers that might be planning something in the coming weeks or days or months or hours, depending on when you're watching this. And they can offer you, solidarity, right? There is power in numbers. It's also important for you to organize with your neighbors, right? And specifically, if you live in an apartment complex, like it is super important to talk to your neighbors, right? And that might be scary, right? And it might be overdue that you build community with your neighbors, right? So what would this entail? This would entail getting to know them, building trust, and spreading the knowledge you have of the current situation. And then collectively approach your landlords, right? So because there's power in numbers, right? If one of you decides that you're not gonna pay rent, then your landowner can pressure you to actually pay your rent, right? But if there's multiple of you, or if there's a whole complex of you, it's harder for them to actually pressure all of you collectively. And speaking of pressure, it's also important that you do not sign anything right now. A lot of states are working for a rent suspension, right? Which is the ultimate goal of all rent strikes going forward, are with the goal of rent suspension in mind, right? Because what good is a temporary rent hold, right? If we're gonna have to pay it back in 3 months or whatever, when this is all over, but we haven't worked 3 months, right? So it's important that you do not sign anything, because if your state or the federal government, but most likely the state, if they do pass a rent suspension, if that's approved, then if you sign something, you might be out of luck, right? Because you already agreed to something. So don't sign anything. And if you're financially okay, or if your landlord was like very cavalier, very nice about like the rent suspension thing, there's also things you can do. You can financially support others. There's a lot of mutual aid opportunities that I'll link below. And you can also just search your local organization to see who needs financial help, or you can look up hashtags on Twitter, such as Black Trans Fund, and other hashtags that enable you to give directly to people, right? Like, do not give your money to nonprofits right now, because you have to remember that the first people that nonprofits pay are executives and staff. The people that need the money most are like the last people to get the money directly. So if you can help it, give your money directly to grassroots organizations or directly to people. None of this like buying wine from Mila Kunis and Ashton Kutcher, like, and letting those proceeds go to some org that then disperses. Like, no, none of that. Like, give directly to people. Another thing is that you can help others who are calling for their landlords to suspend their rent, right? So join their protests, sign their petitions, right? Show up with them, provide legal counsel with them, or connect them to it if you can. And also call up your state officials, right? And representatives, and be like, hey, we need a rent suspension, right? Because you might be well off, right? But right now it's about like thinking collectively, right? So the more of us that contact and bother state officials, the more likely that this is gonna pass, right? And the more of us like protesting in whatever way that our local organizations are protesting, the more likely that rent suspensions are gonna pass, right? And that's how I want everybody to look at this problem, right? This isn't like you're not alone, because just in the last couple of weeks, there's been millions of people who had to file for unemployment, right? So we're not alone in this situation, right? So it's gonna rely on us like trusting each other, right? And demanding this rent suspension collectively. And there's different efforts, right? There's one on April 25th, a rent strike being organized by certain leftist groups there. And then there's a general strike happening on May 1st, right? So connect with local orgs to see which is taking place in your neighborhood, right? Or if there's resources that you can use to start your own in your neighborhood, right? And I'll attach some resources for folks that you can get connected with in the links below. So that was a lot. And again, this might be scary, but much like on that Animal Crossing island, right? We're not alone. And we might be alone at first, but the more we build, the less alone we'll feel. Right? And that's what it's gonna take. It's gonna take all of us. And we got this. Thank you for joining me. If you want to support the creation of more of this content, I will drop my Patreon link in the description below, and also other pay links if you want to give me a tip for breaking this down for you. Yeah, thank you for joining me, and I hope you come back again in a couple of weeks. All right, bye.